Hello, my name is Cameron Stoffer, and today I am going to be discussing the final assessment that comes along with the TED Talk, The Danger of a Single Story. And I have my book here too as well, if you see me reading from that, because I've highlighted some important parts that I wanted to connect to the TED Talk and about her experience of a single story. And hers pretty much relates to her being labeled as an African here, and the stories, and that she, when she lived in Nigeria, did not really identify as just an African, and when she came to the United States, when people talk about Africans, that they would just directly look at her and guide to her. And she states also that she says, never mind, I knew nothing about places like Namibia, but I did come to embrace this new identity. In many ways, I think of myself now as an African after her time in the States. So we had to do some assignments on our biases, and it really opened up my eyes. I just want to add that in there. I know it's not a part of our final reflection, but it opened my eyes the way that she states how her roommate had this idea of her and already pitied her, and had this story of African and what she'd be like before she even met her, because of these stereotypes that she had grown up to know in the States and the biases that she has had and gained over time. So that really was eye-opening to me, and how she also discusses that her roommate only had the single story of Africa. And so this leads to the question, it says, explain the general concept of a single story and why it can be so dangerous. A single story is, you're only giving one perspective, one story. You're only showing, like, I were to tell one single story about my life, you wouldn't know about the other parts of my life that come in. And it can lead to assumptions. Like the roommate had these assumptions from the one single story she was told about Africa. It can rob people of their dignities. And it says, like here in our textbook, that stereotypes were found to exist for students in non-dominant racial groups. These students were given standardized tests to measure intellectual ability. And then it says, because people drive their self-worth from the racial, ethnic, and cultural groups, students are vulnerable and perceived threats in a group in a way that chronically damage their sense of identity. And this is saying that because of the single story, and they feel threatened by the single story and the stereotypes that come in these standardized tests. And our books talk about how communication is a high expectation for all learners, because if the teacher goes in with these biases and goes in with this idea of what their student is before they even get to know them, and isn't opening to knowing more than just the one story they have heard about them or their cultural or racial and ethnic identities. So that connects with the story and the book, kind of the idea of what a single story is. It's one side you own, and I have also read in this book that some teachers at first, like Miss Lynn, was only open to one side. She didn't really know that she needed to open her eyes to her students' cultural and identity and community and what his home life was like. She just assumed what it was like. And so then it says, we're going to go in and compare a little bit more of the text and the video that she talks about. And so I've highlighted some points I wanted to add in here. It says, it is impossible to talk about the single story without talking about power. There is a word. And whenever I think about power structures of the world, it is a noun that loosely translates to be greater than another. Like economic and political worlds, stories are too defined by the principle of Nkali. How they are told, who tells them, when they are told, and how many stories are told really are dependent on power. So then I'm going to go over here to our book, because this talks about power. And teachers have power with their students as well. Having the teacher role is powerful. You are in charge of these students' daily lives. So that is also what I'm kind of like relating to. And it says, like your teacher has the power to celebrating just food, holidays, and clothing. That is not a culturally responsive classroom and teaching. That your teacher has the power to me as an incoming teacher, I have the power to also include, let's see here, communication styles, values, and attitudes are also a component of culture. It's just not the holidays that they celebrate. And having the power to tell the basic just holidays, the stories of holidays of our students who may celebrate certain holidays that others don't because it's a part of their culture. I have the power to go into depth and add the components about attitudes, the way they communicate, and values and things like that. An example of like this is that I always think about when it comes to power and not knowing your students is I always heard about a teacher who wanted the students to look them in the eyes when she was speaking. There was a little boy who would not do it because in his culture, what the teacher did not know was disrespectful to look someone in the eyes when they were speaking. And she got very upset with him. I think gave him, marked down his conduct card and sent a letter home, not knowing that in his culture it was disrespectful to look someone in the eyes when they were speaking. And she would get very upset with him for not doing that. So I always think about that with power. You have the power to learn about your students and to want to know about their communities, visit their communities. And the book also talks about parent involvement, which I really am going to be big about in my classroom. I'm hoping that is one thing for me. I want the parents to be involved. I want them to know what's going on in their kids' classrooms because a kid spends almost 40 hours a week at school with this teacher. So that is most of their life, pretty much half a day. So I want students to be involved in what's going on. And it also says that research shows higher parent involvement also leads to higher test scores, higher motivation in the classroom, and things like that as well. And so I know I've kind of gotten a little off topic, but there was just so much in this TED Talk that I resonated with, and I know I want to bring into my classroom. And she's opening my eyes of ways how I can bring this in the classroom. Along with the book, it's just really about having a cultural responsive instruction in classroom and connecting with these parents and your students' homes and cultures, and not just the holidays, not just that single story stereotype. Because like she says, where'd it go? The single story of Africa ultimately comes, I think, of Western literature now. Now there's a quote writing of London, and it says, where is it? Beasts who have no houses, he writes, they are also people without heads, having their mouths, their eyes, and their breast. And every time she reads this, she admires him. But what is important about his writing is that it represents the beginning of tradition of telling African stories in the West. A tradition of sub-Saharan African as a place of negatives, difference, darkness of people in a world who wonderful poet are half devil, half child. She's saying that telling these stories of African that aren't true. It's just that one story is robbing them of their identity. It's giving them this negative connotation, and I just wanted to add that in there as well. But it's just very eye-opening reading this and how it relates and how only telling one story is dangerous. You wouldn't, just the idea of telling one single story about something that happened to me in my life. You don't have any background knowledge about me, about my culture, about my identity and what makes me be and my values. And so I'm giving you that stereotype of me without knowing anything else about me. And I just think that's super powerful and something that all teachers need to be aware of. And the number one thing, have a culturally responsive classroom and instructions and teaching. And just make sure all your students are included in every aspect of them in your classroom.